Hello and welcome to this section of Mastering Excel. Here we're going to begin to learn about the topic called pivot tables in Excel. It's got kind of a goofy sounding name in my opinion, but it's really a powerful tool, really just designed to help you distill out important summary information from a very complicated and large data set or table. So pivot tables, just to let you know, this is a great introduction. It's going to teach you how to create pivot tables, teach you how to use pivot tables. But pivot tables can be used for many, many different applications. And certainly we could have, lots and lots of different flavors of uses for pivot tables that we're not going to be able to cover in this one lesson. But this would certainly get you started and give you the underlying concept. So what we have here is a set of data here that we've collected. Let's say we're running a company and we're selling things, and we're selling things to several customers. We sell, so in the company name here, we sell to these different people that are buying from us. We sell to Intel, we sell to Office Depot, we send to Safeway. You skip down here, we also sell to Honda, and so on. So you can see a lot of these are kind of duplicated after a while because we do a lot of business with these different people. And we also recorded the month of sale, and we also recorded the person at this company that we sold to, and we also record how many items we sell to them. So the details don't really matter as far as exactly what we're selling, but in this particular case, all we care about is tracking the company that buys from us, the month in which it happens, the customer name at the company who's doing the purchasing, and the number of units. So you might see that we could carry this list in Excel and just kind of do a good job of keeping track of it. But as you can tell, it's kind of a lengthy list, and this is actually not even that bad, 26 entries. But I could have a list like 3,000 entries long. That would be pretty complicated, and it would be a little bit difficult for me to draw any conclusions from this table. I mean, I could certainly add up the total number of units sold. I mean, I could do that. But it would be difficult to do things like how many items do we sell to Intel Corp, right? Well, we see that we sold 11 items to Intel there. We sold 6 more to Intel there. We sold, anyway, we can go through this list and we can see how many we sold there. So we could add them up. I guess we could sort this list and we could try to add them up, but it would involve, manual steps. And then if you want to take it one step further, what if we only care about January? How many units did we sell to Intel in January? Well, you see we sold 11 units there. The next entry for Intel is in March. The next entry to Intel is in April. So we'd have to go through this list and find all of the January entries where we sold items to Intel, and then we'd have to add them up and so on. So frequently you're carrying a lot of data around in a chart or a table, and you really want some nice summary data, and that is what the concept of a pivot table is. And it has a weird name, but just think of it as summary table. I mean, if I had to name this myself, I would call pivot tables summary tables or master summary tables or something like that. So what we're going to do is do some nice summarizing like that. So we have our table all set up. We don't have any empty rows or empty columns, so that's nice. Excel likes that. So we're going to click anywhere inside of our table there, and then we're going to go to the Insert menu. This is just how we used to do the charting. Notice all the chart commands are over here. But if you look over here, the very first entry is called Pivot Table, and it says easily arrange and summarize complex data in a pivot table. That's what it is. It's a very generic definition, but it's a summary. So let's go ahead and click that, and then it's going to tell us, hey, select a table or data range for the pivot table. Notice that it's highlighted back here. And you can scroll down and see that Excel intelligently captured our entire data. And it's asking us, where do we want to put the pivot table? I could put it in the existing worksheet, but you're going to find that you're going to want it in a new sheet, which will pop up down here. So we like this idea. We're just going to click OK. All right, so then notice a new sheet was created. It's just named Sheet 3. We'll just leave it like that for now. And there is a placeholder here. This is a pivot table that's going to eventually occupy this space over here, but right now it's just a placeholder. What we need to do is set up the pivot table. And I'll be honest with you, the first time I learned about pivot tables, it didn't seem to make a lot of sense. But what you need to do is get your own data and play around with the pivot table. And then you will start to understand the reason behind some of the things are done there. So in our original data, we had company name. In fact, we can go back to our sheet. There's no reason that we have to stay on there. We can go flip back and forth between these sheets. So if we go here, this was our original data, and this data was all jumbled up, right? But we had, again, the same four companies. We had Intel, we had Office Depot, we had Safeway, and we had Honda. And just to remind you of this fact, just to show you the different companies that we have here, I'll go ahead and sort this. I'll just put the cursor there, and I'll go to the sort and filter, sort A to Z, which will sort this data by company. So we have Honda, we have Intel, we have Office Depot, and we have Safeway. You don't need to sort this table. I'm just doing it to show you what's in here. You know, you can do this and kind of see what we have. So we have the four different companies. So let's go back over to sheet 3 where our pivot table holder is. We're going to take the company. We have four companies in this case. We're going to click it and drag it. Notice how it's following the cursor. And you have four places that you can drag it. These are kind of like the four controllers of the pivot table. We want to put the company in the rows column, and typically that's what you're going to do. So we'll drop it there, and immediately Excel creates our pivot table. So right now it's a very simple pivot table, but it's done. And what it has done is it's taken the raw data, which is over here, and Excel looked through it and noticed that the companies here, even though they're duplicated all over the place, there's really only four different companies. And so Excel tells us that we have four different companies there, right? So notice that there is a filter tab at the top. For some reason, if we only wanted to look at Honda, or if we wanted to deselect Intel, I'll say it that way, you could click OK. If you wanted to deselect Office Depot, you could click OK and only look at that information. So let me put all this stuff back, and this is how everything was brought to us. So the pivot table is already created right now, but it's very simple and doesn't really give us a lot of info just yet. Let me zoom in just a little bit so we can jump on top of this. The next thing we're going to do is notice that in these four quadrants, there's another one called values. Typically, you want to drag whatever numerical data you have in your master table to the values column. In this case, it's not going to be the month of sale. It's not going to be the customer name. None of those are numbers, but the number of units sold. That's the only numerical thing we have. So we're going to drop that into that spot. Notice that the pivot table has now expanded. It went through and it looked for all Honda entries, and it totaled up all of these Honda entries, basically all of these right here. It went and looked at the company, the unique name called Honda, and it added all these guys up, and it put 47 there. And it did the same thing for Intel, the same thing for Office Depot, and it also created a grand total. So if we wanted to stop here, this is a kind of a useful pivot table by itself if we just wanted that summary data, right? And we notice that we can still filter here. We can take Honda and Intel off the list, for instance, and we can just look at their totals and we can see the grand total there. So at any step of the way, you can begin filtering and playing around with the data. So this is useful already, but we're going to get a whole lot more use by taking the other column called month of sale, and we're going to drag that to the filter, because ultimately we might want to know how many units were sold in January, how many units were sold in February. So when you want to filter the master pivot table, you want to drag whatever filter makes sense, in this case the month, into the filters spot. So now let's drop that in there and let it go. So right now when you did that, another entry popped up at the top that says month of sale. So again, it's looking at the data on the other page. It's using all months, January through December, and it's displaying all this data. Now, if we drop this down, we have the option of selecting all of these months or just some of these months. Let's say we're only interested in May sales data. If we click OK, then the month of sale is May. In the month of May, we only sold to Intel Corp and we only sold to Safeway, and the total number of units that we sold in May to these guys was 12 and 12 for a total of 24. If we wanted to do this manually, it would be kind of a pain, because I'd have to go in here, I have to find the month of May, I'd have to basically sort by the month of May, and then I'd have to see who did we sell to, and if there are multiple entries for vendors, then I'd have to add them up and get the subtotal, and then I could be done. But then let's say, all right, now I don't care about May anymore. Let's look at December. Let's look at the Christmas season. And now Honda and Office Depot are the ones that make sense. Let's look at January. Now we have three different vendors that we sold to in January, and here are the totals that we sold to in January. So you see the power of this It's already given us the ability to distill and to simplify all of this raw data in a much more digestible fashion. This is not very useful to me. It's all the raw data, but it's just not terribly intuitive. Here I can say, all right, let me go look at the month of September, and I can see that I've sold 8 units to Office Depot, 16 to Safeway, for a grand total of 24 units in the month of September, and I'm able to get that because of the pivot table. So let me drop this down and go back and select all months. We get back to all of our grand total information. The final thing we're going to drop in here is customer name, because we also recorded in our pivot table and our raw data, we recorded who was the person that purchased these items. So if that's something you want reflected in your pivot table, then you will drag that down to the fourth area. In this case, it's called columns. And when I let go, I'm going to be greeted with a lot of additional information. So let me zoom out just a little bit so you can kind of see the full glory of what's going on. I'll zoom out a lot so you can kind of see the whole thing. And then I'll go back into 100%, just over 100%, and show you that you can scroll left and right. So again, for all months of the year, that's what this top filter is. What we have here is our sales data. We still have our grand totals for our vendors that we were selling to, right? And the total for the year, but it breaks all of that stuff down to who we sold to. So we can see that for Intel, for instance, if you want to highlight this row and just look across, we sold 11 units to Arnold, we sold 15 units to Frank, 6 to Fred, and so on. If we add all these numbers up, what we're going to end up getting is 64, which is the kind of like the executive summary stuff. Now we're getting all of the detailed information. And because everything is filterable, I can, for instance, go drop down and say, well, let's take a look at August and see what happened in August. In August, I only sold to these 2 companies, but now instead of just getting the grand total information and the subtotals, I can see who I sold to. So that, in a nutshell, is what a pivot table is. I can actually select multiple items. I can go August, September, and October. I can take a look at that quarter, for instance, and I can see that in that region I sold to these 3 companies. I can scroll all the way to the right and get the number sold to those companies and the grand total, but I can also see who I sold to along the way. To get that kind of information from the raw pivot would be a real pain. I would have to go figure out what months of the year, and I have to go group them, and then I'd have to go add up and then somehow annotate who I sold to, and I'd kind of have to end up creating another chart altogether, and the pivot table stuff just kind of automates that. So let me go and select all months again. And just to remind you, because you dropped customer name on here, I actually can filter by person. I can actually say, well, I'm going to take all of these people out. I know that I sold to a guy named Gary. I don't remember what month that was. I know I sold to a guy named John. I don't remember what month that is, but I remember for sure I sold to Gary and John. Let me figure out when that happened so that I can click OK, and then it's going to tell me that that was actually a sale that happened. Both those guys worked at Office Depot. And if I go look at Gary and John over here, if I go find their name, John works at Office Depot and Gary works at Office Depot. So again, it's one of those situations where it's letting you filter and manage lots and lots of data very, very easily. So again, this is sort of a introduction to pivot tables. It's a great way to visualize and understand what pivot tables are and to show you how to use them. But there are lots of different subclasses of pivot tables that you can learn about now that you know this basic concept and play with yourself. So just think of pivot tables as a way to greatly simplify complicated sets of information and also let you filter quickly through the data without hunting and pecking around. So make sure you understand this, go back through it, play with it yourself, duplicate this kind of information, go create your own pivot table, drag those guys into the 4 quadrants like we talked about. It's going to take some trial and error, but you'll see how the pivot table situation is set up, and I hope that this example clarifies it for you, make you realize that you can use Excel to simplify a great deal of complicated information.